What to expect of AI in 2019. I'm going to tell you 8 trends to watch for next year regarding artificial intelligence. Also, the code of conduct controversy lives on. There is a new Linux patch that replaces F words with hugs in kernel comments, but some cry censorship. There is a story of a comparison of how a few profile Linux distros are running on Amazon's EC2. We're going to take a look at that. Also, the first truly open source smartphone, Necuno, unveils its KDE on Linux handset. And Quora has been hacked. Another major website has been hacked, and the data of more than 100 million users has been stolen. These are 5 stories that I will be taking into account. The first story on the docket, what to expect with AI in 2019. 8 trends to watch for next year regarding AI. So this article comes from the Enterprisers Project. This article is written by Kevin Casey, and as always, I will link to all the articles discussed on the show in the show description. So reading a little bit from the blurb at the top of the article, forget the job-stealing robot predictions. Let's focus on artificial intelligence trends around talent, security, data analytics, and more that will matter to IT leaders. So Kevin here has 8 trends to watch for in 2019 regarding AI. Number 1, AI powers the next phases of digital transformation. Digital transformation, another buzzword here. Anyway, just reading briefly here. Unlike most of the predictions and discussions of how autonomous vehicles and robots will eventually affect the job market, I contend that the biggest trend in AI will be an acceleration in the digital transformation, making existing business systems smarter. He goes on to mention that a lot of what we've seen with AI regarding digital transformation has effectively been dry runs, right? He mentions things like airline, hotel booking systems, web applications, healthcare systems, and many more examples where their digital transformation initiatives to this point have effectively been just dry runs for what will be the AI-fueled transformation to come in 2019 and beyond. And he also mentions that those that jump on this earlier rather than later will, of course, be ahead of the game. Number 2 of his trends to watch for regarding AI in 2019 is meet the new talent gap, AI skills. Now, what he's talking about here is you need to find developers with the skills needed to develop AI. So he writes here, I'm going to briefly mention a quote here. Most organizations want to embrace AI as part of their digital transformation, but do not have the developers, AI experts, and linguists to develop their own or to even train the engines of pre-built solutions to deliver on the promise. So that quote was from Pat Calhoun, who is a founder and CEO at Espressive. So AI skills, that's going to be the next big trend to watch next year is, there's going to be a rather big job market out there for those that have the skills to become AI developers. Number 3, invest in developing AI skills internally. Once again, companies need to invest internally in training their people. So this is going to be the next big job market. Those that are looking to possibly get into this job market, now is the time to start focusing on that, because next year, a lot of companies are going to be looking for people with the skills needed for AI development. So as far as the internal development, Kevin in the article here mentions that companies will have to get serious about training advanced technologies like AI, ML, etc. Smart companies will look to in-house experts and partner with universities to teach the tech that they value, etc., etc. Number 4 in his trends of what to watch for regarding AI in 2019. AI will change, not replace, existing teams. I think a lot of people fear that artificial intelligence will end up replacing humans, as far as like the job market, that humans will soon become obsolete. Everything will be automated. Everything will be artificial. And I don't think that's going to be the case. It's certainly not going to be the case in 2019. Reading a brief paragraph here. AI isn't a silver bullet for closing the skills gap. It is an important part of the solution to some of our most complex and resource-intensive challenges. I expect to see organizations that embrace this balance between human and machine to achieve the most success with AI in the year ahead. So again, AI will change, but it will not replace your existing teams. Humans will still be required for most of what we do. Certainly in 2019, AI is not going to replace humans, certainly not in a lot of critical areas. Number 5, security will increasingly depend on AI. We've already seen this. A lot of, especially like web companies now, security, it is hard to have enough humans to effectively, combat the threats that are out there. Artificial intelligence will increasingly be a player in security. It just makes common sense. That is one area where AI will be much better than humans. Number 6, open source AI communities will thrive. Now this, of course, is something I've been saying for the last few weeks. Every time I mention AIs, particularly on these taking into account episodes, is that AI, the open source community, will dominate AI. I mean, AI, you're not going to be able to get where you want to go with AI using proprietary software. It's going to take an open source community to make a lot of this stuff happen. Reading a brief quote here. Today, more leading-edge software development occurs inside open source communities than ever before, and it is becoming increasingly difficult for proprietary projects to keep up with the rapid pace of development that open source offers. That is a quote from Ibrahim Haddad, who is actually the director of research at the Linux Foundation. So a biased opinion, no doubt, but I agree with him. He goes on to say that AI is no different, and it's becoming dominated by open source software that brings together multiple collaborators and organizations. So open source obviously is going to be a big player regarding AI. Number 7 in his trends to watch for, AI will empower you to actually analyze more data. So big data, right? Big data is becoming bigger and bigger all the time. Data is doubling every year. Budgets and team sizes don't double every year, right? We're having more and more data to analyze, but you're still, in many cases, got the same number of human beings working at these companies. They can't analyze all this data. Who's going to do it? Machines. AI. Number 8, the last trend here he talks about is AI will become increasingly invisible. He mentions, of course, a lot of the work that AI will be behind the scenes. Most human beings will never even notice what is going on with a lot of AI. I would certainly agree with that. Anyway, again, we'll link to the article in the show's description. Very interesting read from Kevin Casey over at the Enterprisers Project. And the second story on the docket tonight is a new Linux patch replaces all those F-bombs that are in kernel comments. In the Linux kernel, there's comments in the code. You leave comments in the code, for people that come after you, so you can tell them, hey, this next section of code does this, or I added this code for this reason, that reason, etc. But there are a lot of comments in the Linux kernel that include obscenities. There are many instances of the F word in the Linux kernel, should you choose to actually read through the kernel comments. Anyway, there is a new patch. Linux patch replaces F words with, quote, hugs in kernel comments, but some cry censorship. And this is interesting that they're replacing all these F words with hugs, virtual hugs, because that was a controversy going back to FreeBSD had a bit of a controversy. They did not want people to send out virtual hugs because they thought it was a form of harassment. So it is both. This story is kind of poking fun at the FreeBSD virtual hug controversy, but it also brings to light Linux's own code of conduct controversy regarding the new code of conduct that the Linux kernel team recently adopted. So the little blurb at the top of this article, by the way, the article is from ZDNet. This was written by Liam Tung. Linux developers clean up code comments to align with the new contributor code of conduct. So a lot of obscenities in the Linux kernel littered throughout it, usually in comments. They mentioned that there were 15 components where the use of the F word appeared in code comments. They have now been swapped out for the word hug or hugging. So if you used F or effing, it has now been replaced with hugs or hugging. So, for example, they give an example of one of these comments that used the F-bomb. It actually used 2 F-bombs. IOC3 is effing effed beyond belief. That has now been changed to IOC3 is hugging hugged beyond belief. That's very funny. There was another comment. I don't know if Linus put this in or somebody else. I'm sure it was probably Linus Torvalds. He had a comment, I guess, directed at Sun. Only Sun can take such nice parts of the kernel and hug up the programming interface. It used to say effed up, but now it says only Sun can take nice parts and hug up the programming interface. Good job, guys. So a lot of this is actually kind of funny. It has created somewhat of a backlash from some people. A lot of people really took that code of conduct controversy to heart and saw it as a real negative thing, that it was really going to affect the kernel. And that code of conduct has been cited as the reason why this patch was put in place to clean up the code, because part of the code of conduct includes things as far as harassment, abusive, offensive, degrading language, which some of these comments are exactly that. So that is why some of this has been cleaned up, but some people are crying foul. They say this is a form of censorship. You know, again, the whole social justice warrior mentality is starting to take hold of the Linux kernel. I don't see that really. I think, honestly, yes, there's a code of conduct. They say they want to avoid the use of abusive and offensive language. I don't mind them taking out these crazy comments. Some of these comments are kind of abusive and degrading anyway. Also, I mean, this is code. Why do you want some of this, the use of this language in the Linux kernel? It looks kind of unprofessional and childish in a lot of reason, in many aspects. So I think it's a good thing that they just clean this up anyway. So overall, I think it's a non-issue, but there are those that are trying to make this story into something bigger than I think it is. And the next story on the docket, a comparison of how a few high-profile Linux distributions are running on Amazon's EC2. So this story comes from Phoronix. So this article was written by Michael Larabelle, who of course is the founder of Phoronix. EC2 Cloud Linux benchmarks. So he takes 6 popular, very high profile Linux distributions. He takes Amazon Linux, Clear Linux, Debian, Red Hat, SUSE, and Ubuntu. And he does several benchmarks here regarding the EC2 platform. I think he does something like nearly 50 benchmarks. It's like 48, I think. I didn't actually count it. But anyway, for those of you that are watching or on video, you will see the charts I'm about to go over. For those of you listening to the audio only, basically, if you've ever seen Phoronix's benchmarks, it's various charts. He's going to have about 50 charts, bar graphs, and he compares these 6 Linux distros, how they perform on Amazon's EC2. So the first benchmark, SQLite, less is better. So the less is better Amazon Linux 2 actually comes out in first place on that particular benchmark. The compile benchmark, more is better. SUSE edges Amazon for first place in that particular benchmark. The next compile benchmark here, Clear Linux comes out quite a bit ahead of the rest of the pack. Rodinia, the Rodinia benchmark, less is better. Clear Linux is the big winner in that particular benchmark. I could go through all 50 of these benchmarks, but it would be quite boring, especially for the audio listeners that cannot see the graphs. I'll just briefly mention a few more, and then I'll cut straight to the point of these benchmarks. The Pi benchmark, Clear Linux was ahead. PHP bench, more is better. Clear Linux was the winner. PHP micro benchmarks, Clear Linux was the winner. You're seeing a pattern here. PHP micro benchmarks, another one. Clear Linux was the winner. Systemd total boot time, less is better. Clear Linux was the big winner. For those of you that are listening to the audio, Clear Linux just dominates in Systemd total boot time for that particular benchmark. Wow. Anyway, cutting to the chase. So there were, actually it wasn't 50 benchmarks. It looks like there were 37 benchmarks. So Michael Larabelle mentions that he did 37 benchmarks here running Amazon EC2 with these 6 Linux distributions. Again, the 6 Linux distributions he did was SUSE, Amazon, Red Hat, Ubuntu, Debian, and Clear Linux. The big winner was Intel's Clear Linux distribution, which came in first 51% of the time with 24 wins. So Intel's Clear Linux distribution does the best with Amazon EC2. For those that care, we don't talk about Intel's Clear Linux distribution that often, especially those of us, that promote free and open source software. But there you have it. Clear Linux was the big winner. Debian 9.6 did pretty respectably in these benchmarks. Debian 9.6 came in place 23% of the time with 11 wins. The 4 other Linux distros, they all had 5 wins or fewer in these benchmarks. They didn't do that well at all. The worst ones, Amazon Linux 2, oddly enough, had just 1 win in the 37 benchmarks, and it finished in last place 15 times, which was the most of any distro tested. Red Hat was right behind it. It finished last in the benchmarks 14 times. Some of that could be, how these Linux distributions are constructed. Some of them are a little more newer and bleeding edge than others. Certainly the old, stale, crusty distros probably are going to do worse than those with fresher packages in these benchmarks. At least that's probably what was going on. And the 4th story on the docket. The first truly open source smartphone? Maybe. Necuno unveils its KDE on Linux handset. So this story from Liam Tung over at ZDNet. A second story by Liam Tung today. The first truly open source smartphone. So Necuno hopes its forthcoming Linux smartphone will offer users an escape from the walled gardens created by Google's Android and Apple's Mac OS. So we have had many attempts at kind of Linux mobile operating systems, real open source operating systems. Android doesn't count. There have been many of these in the past. They all have failed. The public has never really latched on to any of these Android and iOS alternatives. Reading briefly from the article here. Following in the footsteps of Yalla, the maker of would-be Android challenger Sailfish OS, fellow Helsinki-based company upstart Necuno is having a crack at the seemingly impossible. So, you guys remember a number of years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, Yalla was a company. They were creating Sailfish OS, which was a really nice mobile operating system. It never really caught on. Yalla didn't do much in that space. Nokia tried to get in the game there for a little bit. They had MeeGo, the MeeGo operating system. That's now been abandoned. Many of these mobile OSs have been created and abandoned over the years. What was another one? WebOS was another one that was around for a bit, and it looked really good. It seemed like a great mobile operating system. It just never catches on. It's hard to get any an alternative in this space. Android, of course, dominates, right? And Apple and the iPhones and the iOS, that is the alternative to Android. So yesterday, according to this article, Necuno revealed details about the phone that will spearhead its effort to offer an open source alternative to iOS and Android. So they are teaming up with KDE. Those of you that don't know, KDE is the K desktop environment. For you Linux users, you're using the Plasma desktop that is made by KDE. They are partnering with the KDE team to make a Plasma desktop for mobile. So, actually, KDE already kind of makes a Plasma mobile desktop, so that is why Necuno is partnering with them. KDE has partnered with other phone manufacturers in the past. They've partnered with Purism for their Librem 5, which the Librem 5 is a smartphone that's been billed as more secure and privacy-focused alternative to Android. You would think, because it's free and open source, that it would be more secure than a proprietary operating system like Android. Although many parts of Android are open source, it's not completely open source. Necuno is going to offer a rough outline, or is offering a rough outline of its forthcoming phone. It says it will be made in Finland, for those that care where the device is actually going to be made. I know some people have a kind of negative bias, especially for devices made in China. They see Chinese-made devices as being inferior in a lot of ways. Anyway, the device will have a 5.5-inch display. It will run on NXP's ARM Cortex A9i.MX6 quad-core chipset. Now, some people have complained that is not a great chipset. but the reason behind them using that chipset, I think, is because they're wanting to be an open platform, and that particular chipset is in line with that particular goal more so than alternatives. It is worth noting that Necuno, they highlighted that this first device will not have a cellular connection. The company is looking at LTE options in the future. However, right now, there is no cellular connection with this initial Necuno device. So the quote from the article here is, quote, "For obvious security reasons, our first evolution devices won't have a cellular module included, but we know how important this might be to you, so we are in active discussions with carrier partners." So there you have it. And again, the processor seems to be the big complaint from some. The i.MX6 is a very old processor. Necuno says it chose this because, quote, "of its ability to use free and open software without any binaries." So Necuno wants this device to be a truly free and open device. This processor helps make that possible, although, again, it is an old processor. Purism, though, also opted for the i.MX6 processor when they did the Librem 5, but have since switched to a newer processor, the i.MX8, due to a bug that caused extreme battery drain in the Librem 5. So maybe Necuno will also upgrade the processor to the new i.MX8 in the future. Anyway, I hope this works out. We really do need a true free and open alternative to Android and iOS. Necuno with Plasma Mobile, maybe they can make some headway into this. I really hope this succeeds, but I have my doubts because this has been tried, at least a dozen times in the past few years, and it has failed miserably every time, and I keep hoping that something will be different this time. And the fifth and final story on the docket tonight is a major hack, again, a major security breach of a website. Quora has been hacked. Quora is a very large question and answer kind of website. Think of it as something, those of you familiar with something like Yahoo Answers, where somebody asks a question, people answer it, and the answers are, voted on. The best answer usually is at the top of the list. Quora is a very, very popular website. This article comes from False Bytes. This was Quora hacked, data of 100 million users stolen, the title of the article. In an official blog post, quote, Quora announced that on Friday it found that user data of about 100 million users was compromised. Some unauthorized third party gained access to the company's systems. So what data was compromised? Well, it includes things like name, email address, encrypted passwords, and data from other linked networks. Quora has also hinted at the possibility that the leak includes other public content, things like question, comments, answers, upvotes, downvotes, direct messages, and answer requests. So pretty big security breach here. Again, I mentioned that because, again, 100 million users. Quora is not a small website. Quora is actually a very big website. It comes up all the time. When you do a Google search, you type in any question in Google, a lot of times some of the top results are Quora answers. So I know many of you have used Quora in the past. If you have, just wanted to put that out there. Your data may have been compromised. From the official Quora website, there is a security update, a FAQ. Basically, what happened? Quote, we recently became aware that some user data was compromised due to unauthorized access to our systems by a malicious third party, yada, yada, yada. They mentioned that, there's leading digital forensics and security experts investigating this. They want to find out what happened. Law enforcement has been contacted, etc., etc. What kind of user data has been affected? Officially, from the Quora side, it says name, email address, encrypted password, and data imported from linked networks, but they do hint that there may be other data that was also compromised. They're not sure. Again, investigation still ongoing. How many users were affected? Around 100 million, no exact number. How do you know if you've been affected by this? Quora claims they will contact everybody that has been affected by this, so they will let you know. Anyway. And that was the fifth and final story for this edition of Taking Into Account. This was Taking Into Account, episode 19. I try to release Taking Into Account once a week. I release a new episode of Taking Into Account every Thursday. At least that is the goal. Sometimes it releases a little late, but look for episode 20 of Taking Into Account next Thursday. Other than the 5 main topics that I cover on Taking Into Account, I do like to end these shows by reading a viewer question or comment. I tend to get these viewer questions and comments from those of you that are following me over on Mastodon. If you are not following me over on Mastodon, my question to you is, why are you not following me on Mastodon? Guys, get off of Twitter, get off of Facebook. Those are no good for you. They don't respect your privacy and security, not to mention that things like Twitter, it's just a giant hate machine, a drama machine. You don't get any of that BS over on Mastodon. It's friendly. The stuff that gets posted over there tends to be more informative stuff. There's not a lot of backbiting and a lot of infighting and that sort of thing. So this question from one of my followers over on Mastodon. Hey DT, now that the Google Pixel Slate is available, what would be your choice? Since in one of your earlier videos, you said that in the upcoming time you might buy a Chrome OS based PC. Therefore, at the current time, what would be your choice? Now that the Pixel Slate is out, would you rather buy a low-end traditional laptop with Chrome OS, or rather have some cash in order to get the more powerful i5 or i7 variants of the new Google Pixel Slate along with the keyboard case? Good question. So the Slate is not the kind of machine somebody like me would buy. For one thing, the Slate is more of a tablet. Yes, it comes with a keyboard that you can dock with it. It is very expensive for a tablet too. It is, I think the starting price, the lower end models are right at $1,000. I think $1099 US. Some of the more expensive ones run even higher. For me, if I want to run a tablet, I'm not sure I would want to run Chrome OS on a tablet. I would just buy a really nice Android tablet because that is what Android is designed for, to be a mobile platform. Chrome OS, I would rather have Chrome OS on a more traditional laptop myself. I would just buy, one of the more powerful Chrome OS laptops, not, one of these tablet or hybrid tablet / laptops. I don't think Chrome OS really makes sense in tablet form, at least not yet. Maybe it will down the road, but for me right now, if I was buying a Chrome OS device, I would want something with a real keyboard. I would want a real laptop with Chrome OS on it. Or if I was going to do a tablet, Android. That's where I'm at right now. Great question from over on Mastodon. Before I go, this show was made possible by Ansem, Carlos, Chris, David, Leor, Rob, and Tony. They are the producers of the show. They are my highest tiered patrons over on Patreon. The show is also brought to you by, you see all those names on the screen, those fine ladies and gentlemen. They are the supporters of this channel. Without these people, none of this would be possible. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting the channel. You will find me at DistroTube over on Patreon. Peace, guys.